This time's different, okay, because this is the unicorn event, as you might call it, right? COVID has changed everything. COVID has affected how the office sector, the industrial sector, and the lab sector have all responded. The damage that will be done to all three sectors of that will be catastrophic to building owners, and it's already started. Okay, early last year in 2024, we already saw office landlords starting to get foreclosed upon. And these things don't make headlines, right? It's not like the local newspaper, another high-rise foreclosed upon, right? It is its own ecosystem where people and institutions don't want to talk about the failure, right? The landlords don't want to talk about it. The lenders certainly don't want to talk about it. The brokers are paid not to talk about it, right? And so you have to almost be on the inside to know this is happening. And you might, in the business section, see some sort of small press release about, Symphony Towers in downtown San Diego selling for, $90-some a foot, okay, which put into context pre-COVID, that would have been a $400 to $450 a foot building, right?
So 25% of its
arguably
20%.
20% of its value, it sells for in an arm's length transaction compared to its pre-COVID price. Okay, and that's what we're seeing right now in these assets, particularly in downtown areas when they get foreclosed upon. There's no debt market for these things, and nobody wants to touch them. And so we are in a catch the falling knife environment where we don't really know where the bottom is of this asset class. And there's another $1 trillion of debt that's going to expire in the next year around office space and commercial loans. And a lot of that isn't going to get refinanced. It's going to get foreclosed upon. So there's a lot of turmoil to come for commercial real estate landlords that have debt coming due in the next 2 or 3 years. And by the way, interest rates now are 6.5% from 3%. And so even if your building occupancy and rent level is reflective of what it was pre-COVID, and most aren't, right? Most are getting less rent with a lower occupancy, your debt service is going to double. So these refinancing windows that have opened up have created a real problem for landlords. It's going to be a tough time. It's going to look, by the time it's over, much more like the early 90s than any kind of real estate adjustment we've ever seen before. Because this consequence of COVID is now permanent, right? You see headlines talking about Goldman Sachs coming back and certain companies demanding their employees come back 5 days a week, Apple, but they're really the exception, not the rule.
You don't see it in your customer base.
It is not happening. The reality is in the thousands of companies we represent every year, less than 5% are demanding their employees come back full time. They have essentially given up, okay, or it's working good enough, or it's become a entitlement for employees where people will leave, and there's all kinds of data out about that, right? Surveys that 30 to 50% of people will get their resume out if they're forced to come back 5 days a week. And you have this bigger problem that pre-COVID, I had clients that might have 100 or 500 employees, and everyone lived in that county within commuting distance. Well, now these same employers, their employees live in 20 or 28 different states. Like employers have had between 10 to 20% of their employees leave the region where the job is. They've moved to Tennessee or South Carolina or wherever they've moved to, right? Gone back to family, lowered their cost of living, right? Wanted to buy a house but couldn't afford to in Southern California. Now they're in Des Moines. These people are working remotely and effectively. The employer's gotten used to it. The employee's happy, and the retention has been high. Well, how do you force everybody back to the office if 50 or 150 of your employees don't even live in the county anymore? It's essentially impossible, right? And they claim it to be discriminatory. So, and then what I've learned is that there's nothing wrong with office space, right? Office space is highly amenitized, beautiful, safe, attractive, has, maybe free lunches, free Diet Coke in the refrigerator, and there's people there, it's exciting. It's the commute that's the problem. And if you quantify the cost of the commute to the employer and employee, the economics are somewhere around $5,000 to $8,000 a year of real cost to an employee having to commute.
The time that they're spending.
The wear and tear on the vehicle, the fact that maybe they don't even have a car anymore. Like some families have downsized the number of vehicles they have. The cost of parking, the cost of mass transit, the cost of the space, right? So it's a real thing for employees. Like if you're commuting to downtown Los Angeles and you're having to pay to park $400 per month, that's almost $5,000 a year after tax, right? So somebody has to make $8,000 a year pre-tax just to pay to park in downtown Los Angeles. Well, who wants to do that? And plus you have to drive an hour to get there each way. It's 10 hours a week. Well, what could they be doing with 10 hours a week for their own quality of life or increased productivity for the company? And so the commute is the problem, not the office. And so what you see are employers now trying to move the offices closer to where more people live. So you see a flight out of the downtown areas to the suburbs. So for example, downtown Seattle, availability rates are 30%. But in Bellevue, they're building a new high-rise building. Okay, because
so in the suburbs is okay.
Exactly. You take San Diego, for example. San Diego has the softest downtown in the country. Availability rates downtown are 40% in downtown San Diego, the highest in the country. Okay, but the suburbs are all bouncing around 18, 22%. You see that in the center city areas, generally around the country, the effect is more extreme because that's where parking is more expensive. That's where mass transit is more expensive. That's where it's harder to get to from where people live. And so people are most resistant to coming back to the downtown areas.
When you mention availability rate, that's like what's vacant right now, right? So do you think that number is going to change? It's going to go up, right? Based on what you were saying.
Yeah, so a little different. Our industry likes to talk about the vacancy rate. This is sort of a greater fool problem in that lenders, developers, landlords, brokers all want to talk about vacancy. Vacancy is only measuring a subset of the greater availability. So for example, you're a business owner. You decide that at the end of your lease term this year, you don't want to renew your 20,000 square feet, and you let the landlord know. The landlord puts the 20,000 square feet on the market for lease. It's not vacant because you're still here. You're still paying for it, even though next year you're going to be zero and you're 20,000 square feet now. Or imagine you put your space on the market for sublease. 20,000 square feet on the market for sublease, but it's not vacant. You're still in it,
but
right?
It's still available, so
exactly.
That's how you...
Right, so what we look at is the availability rate, looking at all office space for lease or sublease in the country or in a metro area. And the result is, guess what? You have 40 to 70% more square footage available than you do vacant. Okay, so the brokerage community are running around saying, well, the vacancy is only 15%, but the availability might be 24%. And that's part of the reason we've gotten into this problem, is that our industry wants to kind of keep a veil on how bad it is. They don't want people to know how bad it is, right? Because that becomes power to the tenant. What we're talking about is this with transparency, so everybody understands what's available.